Hello all, I am Pranjali Joshi from PICT Pune. Welcome to the session 5 on database management system. The session covers ER data model, how to design an ER model, notations used to design an ER model, and example. So let's start with the ER model. What is an ER model? So ER model is an entity relationship data model. ER model is an entity relationship data model. Entity relationship data model is used to represent the overall conceptual design of an enterprise. It is always represented diagrammatically. Sometimes it can be visualized as a flowchart like structure. So why we are using ER model? ER models are used to express the overall logical structure of a database which can be represented graphically. Let us start with the ER model development process. First step is to identify the entities. Second, determine the attributes for each entity. Select the primary key for each entity. Establish the relationship between the entities. Draw an entity model and lastly test the relationship. Now see the example on which we are going to design an ER model. Let me read the problem statement. A company database needs to store information about employees, departments, and children of the employees. Employee works in a department. A child must be identified by a name when the parent is known. The information about the child is not required once the parent leaves the company. Let me start with the designing of an ER model. So the first step in ER development model is identify the entities. So now here, as per the problem statement, step number 1 is to identify, step 1 is to identify the entities. So the first entity that we have identified in the problem statement is employee, second is department, and third is child. Now step 2. Step 2 where we need to identify the attributes for each entity. Okay, so we'll identify here the attributes of each entity. What are the attributes? Okay, before explaining attributes, I must tell you what is an entity. An entity is a thing or object in the real world which can be identified from all other objects. For example, we can consider student as an entity having certain descriptive attributes like roll number, name of student, class of student. Similarly, in the given problem statement, we are having employee, department and child as the entities. So now here in step 2, we are going to identify the descriptive properties that are the attributes of the entity. So the employee entity is having the attributes like employee ID, employee name, salary. I will take only 3 attributes over here. Then department. Department is having department ID, department name. And child entity can have name, comma, age of the child. So here we have completed step number 2, identify the attributes. Now step 3, what is step 3 in designing ER model? Select the primary key for each entity. So now what is primary key? Primary key is the key with which we are going to identify that entity uniquely. So here for employee ID is the primary key with which we can identify the employee uniquely. For department, department ID is the primary key. So I can write over here for employee, employee ID will be primary key. For department, department ID will be the primary key. And for child, name will be the primary key. Okay. So we have completed up to step 3. Now what is the step 4? Step 4 is to establish the relationship between the entities. So now let us identify what are the relationships between these 3 entities. So we know that relationship between employee and department, relationship between employee and child. Okay, so we have completed first 4 steps of designing an ER model. Now, next step is to draw an entity model. Now, before drawing an entity model, we must know the various notations of the entity relationship data model. So, let me draw the various components used for designing an ER diagram. The first component that we are going to use for designing ER model is the rectangle. Okay, rectangle is used to represent entity. Whenever we are considering entity is of two types. One, it is a strong entity, another it is a weak entity. What is strong entity? Strong entity is an entity which is having sufficient attributes to identify it uniquely. And of course, it will not be dependent on some other entity for its existence. So, if we are going to consider the examples given in our problem statement, employee can be considered as a strong entity set. Whereas, what will be the weak entity set? The entity set which is not having sufficient attributes to identify it uniquely and it is dependent on some other entity for its existence. So, here in this example, for weak entity set, we can consider child as a weak entity set because here name of a child can be repeated for many employees or it can be same for many employees name of child. So of course this child entity will be always dependent on strong entity set employee. So that's why we'll consider child as a weak entity set. So here the first notation we have learned. Okay. Now the second notation that we are going to use for ER diagram, we need to use to represent the relationship set. So I need to use diamond notation to represent the relationship. Diamond notation to represent the relationship set. Okay. Now, of course, to describe the entity, we need to use one more notation which is represented with the oval. So, this is used to represent the attributes for the entity. And the last notation that we are going to see that we can use line to link the entities with the relationship set. Okay, so these are the major components which we are using for designing an ER diagram. So Now let me start with the design of an ER diagram. So we have seen all the notations which are required for designing ER model. Rectangle for entity, diamond for relationship, oval for attributes, and line to link the entities with the relationship set. So let me start with the design. Okay, so we have identified how many entity set. So in the given problem statement, we have identified three entity set. First is the employee, second department, and third child. Okay, let me use the same size of rectangle. Okay, so here I have taken this rectangle 2 and rectangle 1, which is rectangle 1 will use for employee. So let me name it. This will be employee. Second, it will be used for department. Let me copy this and okay. So yes, so this will be the third entity set. Let me name it. It is a child. So now we need to uh, describe all these entities with its descriptive attributes. So let me take scale with which we are going to draw the attributes for the entity set. So see over here that the notation we are going to follow pictorially. Okay, the same will be here, over here. Okay, and similarly, I will, sorry, let me delete this. Yes, let me move on the board. Okay, child, let me take scale. So instead of taking scale, what I will do, I will copy the line over here. Okay, let me take scale again. So students, you are also required to use scale in order to draw the ER diagram properly. Okay, so let me take another line which will be connected to the attribute. So here also for child, yes, okay. So now here I need to use relationship between employee and department. So I'm going to use the diamond. Okay, so here I have taken the diamond. Okay, similarly, I will require another diamond which is going to represent the relationship between employee and child. So before taking the descriptive attributes, what I am going to do, I am going to draw the relationship between the entities. Okay, so I will name the relationship set over here. Employee works in the department. Employee works in the department. So let me adjust over here. Okay, employee works in department. I will change its position because it should appear in the middle. So what I will do, I will delete this part and I will position it again. Sorry. Yes, now it's correct position. Employee works. Okay, and here again I need to take the another relationship has. Employee has. So now again here I will have to use scale in order to show the line which will represent or which will connect the relationship between the entities. Okay, so here I'm associating employee with works and department. Similarly, now changing the rotation of the scale. So here connecting employee to the child. So here we have completed the relationship among the entities. Now let me describe this relationship. Here we are considering many employees works in many departments. Okay, so if we are not taking many to many relationship, then we need to take an arrow notation from one side of that particular entity where we are having one-to-one relationship. And here we are considering again many employees has many children. Okay, so here I am not using any other notation over here which is having the one-to-one correspondence. So now the ER diagram is not complete. We need to draw the attributes for the entities. So let me take the oval notation. Okay, so sorry, yes, and here for child also. I am going to take the attributes for the child entity. Okay, now let me take this notation because in this board we are not getting the proper shape of the. So I will delete this and I have got here. So I will copy this. So now, yes, okay, again copy this. Yes. Here also I can get some proper notation. Yes, I am going to take this. Okay. Yeah. Now taking the attributes for another entity set, which is department. Now taking for the second. Yes. So let me name these attributes. Before that, I will erase the remaining part from the board. Yes. Okay. So employee, we had considered the employee ID and here employee name as the attribute. Let me reposition it. Okay. Yes. Employee name. Okay. So here for my convenience, I have taken only two attributes, employee ID, employee name. You will have to add one more attribute, that is the salary. We have taken over here. Okay. So it's very difficult to draw here. So that's why I have not taken salary attribute. So for department ID, other attribute is department name. And yes, for child, name of the child, and here age of the child. Okay. So again the ER diagram is not complete because we have seen that the child entity is a weak entity set because it has to depend on employee entity set. So the notation used for weak entity set, it is a double rectangle. So what I will do here, I will draw double rectangle for representing the weak entity set. Okay, so this is my double rectangle, and whenever we are having such type of relationship between strong entity set and weak entity set, which can be represented with the double lines. So here again I need to draw double lines. Now I will not use scale, but whenever there is a relationship between strong entity set and weak entity set, then we are going to use the double lines, which represents the relationship between strong entity and weak entity set. Now, one more part is left. This ER diagram is not complete. We have to underline the primary key. So, the primary key for employee is the employee ID. So, let me underline that primary key. Employee ID is the primary key. For department ID is the primary key. And for child is the weak entity set. So, it cannot have primary key. So whatever attribute it is having, which is used to identify that entity, is name here, but name can be same for many employees. So we need to draw a dotted line. We we need to draw a dotted line, underline that particular attribute. Okay, so this is called as a discriminating key for weak entity. Discriminating key for weak entity set. Okay, so I hope you have understood these basic steps to design an ER model. So, students, with the given problem statement, we have completed this ER data model. Okay, thank you, students.